Welcome to episode number 126 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. I always start off asking people the same question, so I'll ask you, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I've been wondering, that's the question of life. I've been seeking this answer for my entire life. Now, I'm known as Will Turpin, bassist with Collective Soul, and that's mainly what I'm here for.
I'm so happy to talk to you, Will. As I said, we met in a strange situation, which was the band was playing across Canada with my good friends in Our Lady Peace, and I'd seen you, and we'd actually had conversations back when the band first came out, because I used to be more of a rock music journalist. But Duncan Coots, who's the bass player for Our Lady Peace, was off during his encore introducing us while the band was still on stage. And I think I convinced you at that point to come on the podcast, and you kindly agreed. And here we are. We made it happen. So that's great.
Yeah, I'm into it. And us talking during those little moments, it's not that unnormal for me. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
Well, it's unnormal in the sense of Duncan was literally in the middle of a show.
Yeah.
He's like hanging out talking to us while the singer is off on the other stage doing an acoustic number or something.
Yeah. Rain was out front playing piano, which was I really thought was a really super cool part of the show.
Yeah, it really was. And it's funny. I've known those guys for actually over 30 years, since before they had a record deal. And watching them tour, being a band from the same era as you guys, it did feel in this moment that there really is this resurgence and this passion. People really want to see bands like Collective Soul and Our Lady Peace and Live and Bush. It's really nice to see that it's coming around really again in a big way.
Yeah, our ticket sales are they're bigger than they ever have been in our career in 31 years. So if that's part of the same sign, we're feeling it too.
So it's an interesting thing. I'm curious if you've spoken about it or thought about it on your own, this idea that there are a lot of bands out right now from 80s and 90s. They're actually selling more tickets now than they could at their height back then. That is such a strange phenom to me.
I've been talking to a few friends about that. Like, who would have thought? And you don't really set out, especially as a young band, you don't really set out going, can't wait until 30 years from now, and we can sell more tickets. But the evolution of and the tendencies of things that go on after you've been around for a long time, you don't really foresee. But there's a whole. I guess there's a few factors you would want to contribute that to. I think a lot of people that were from the 90s or maybe even teenagers in the 90s, I think they now have more not disposable income, but they're in their 50s, right? But that being said, we're seeing multiple generations. There's kids at these shows. The 20-year-olds want to check out the dudes who used to rock, and that we're on the playlist, and so there's all generations out there, and when it comes to fans, some of these we see some of these family generations. We see 3 generations all the time. We see a 60-year-old grandfather and a late 30-year-old dad hanging out and bringing his 10-year-old son to the show or daughter or whatever. We see 3 generations all the time. So I think we're just in that wheelhouse of the maximum amount of people that are interested in what we do. And we still do it, right? It's we started out in the 90s wanting to play rock and roll. I remember, we'll probably talk about this more, but the magical Edge Fest tour is when we really became friends with Our Lady Peace. I remember us all, kind of chatting backstage, and we all kind of had a good head on our shoulders in the regard that we were all about songs and trying to have a real career. We were never. I don't think either band was ever. Look how cool we are now. Boy, we've made it, right? That was never something that we thought about. We've made it. It was always, what's going to be the next thing, and how can we make timeless music? And then now, in the last few years, I look back and I'm like, I think we made some timeless music.
Yeah, and I think based off of the crowd reaction, you felt it too. And what's funny, in particular about this, is I know that as the band was thinking about what tours might look like and how good that could look, and your name was being talked about, my reaction was, such a great band. And we haven't seen them in Canada that much, and I'm sure you were playing in the States. It's a different vibe down there for sure. But there's also that feeling too of there's so many songs people know and maybe they hadn't seen you or didn't know that you were still doing what you're doing.
Totally. And there's a lot of humans out there in the world. So when I hear somebody say like, "Oh, I've never seen y'all live," I'm thinking like, well, it's not for lack of us trying. 'Cause we're probably, if I have to guess, I guess we're well over 2,000 shows, or somewhere around there, in our career. But yeah, a lot of people do, you're only in these towns, whether it's Canada or America, you're only in these towns one night, and there's just a lot of people in all these towns. So, we see people all the time. They're like, "Wow, man, I didn't know you." And then that's another thing we hear too is, "I didn't realize y'all did that song and that song," or we just didn't realize how great of a live band you are. We hear that a lot. Yeah, it's strange because you're on the inside looking in. You're like, how has any rock and roll fan not seen us play live at this point?
It's amazing.
But it's not true. There's a ton of humans, and everybody's only got so many minutes in every day, and
Yeah. So let's talk about the bass. I'm super curious about your bass origin story. When did you first see the instrument, and was your first real interaction with the instrument seeing it because you were going to be playing it, or just something you noticed out in the world of music?
Yeah, well, I've got a very individual type growth in music. My father had a recording studio, so instruments were around me at all the time. I don't have a memory of not knowing what a bass, a drum set was, and all these things, and seeing different types of music also. But I started playing piano 8 years old. It was piano lessons, and I really took to it. I think a lot of kids start piano lessons and it doesn't sink in, and it was sinking in, and I was really whizzing through a bunch of music theory at a young age, and drum set also around 8 years old. So I was playing drum set and piano for the longest time. Picked up a fretted instrument, guitar, around 13, 14. But yeah, I mean, I would have been playing. I remember my father, I tell this story. My father called me one afternoon, it was Saturday afternoon, in an era where singer-songwriters had to kind of go to a studio and use a put together band to do any kind of presentable full band demo, outside of just recording to their tape machine and an acoustic guitar. And so my father at Reel to Reel Studios would do, once a weekend, every month or something, there'd be like a singer-songwriter special, and he'd line up the band to be the backing band and try to line up, 2 or 3 singer-songwriters and get in there and do a 3-song demo. And so one afternoon, the drummer couldn't make it for some reason, and everybody was at the studio. The singer-songwriter was there, and my dad called me and said, come on down. We're going to see if you can play a drum track for us or whatever. And he had told the singer-songwriter, I'm going to call my son. He's up the street. I'll rode my bike down there. And if this doesn't work out, I'll cover the musicians for the day, whatever that is. And they were all local network, of course. So it wouldn't have been something where they would have hammered my dad for, a lot of money. But I'll cover the musicians if this doesn't work out, but let's try with my son on drums. And so, yeah, so I remember being in that drum booth, and I do remember that singer. I can't remember who it was, but that would have technically been my first moments in the studio. But I remember him, and we were probably halfway through the first little take, and I knew the guys in the band too because it was my father's friends, and I hung around. I was the oldest child of my father, so I was around. There's still a few guys around that remember me in my underwear and 6-shooters. I used to walk around with a holster and 2 6-shooters in my tidy whities. That was my go-to around 5 years old. But yeah, I remember the singer-songwriter looking at my dad and going, we're good. We're good. He gave him a thumbs up and said, we're good. And so I recorded like 3 songs that afternoon for a singer-songwriter demo. And I've just been around music my whole life.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 13 or 14. It was probably 84, 85. I don't think I was 14. I think I was 13.
So this is like such an interesting aspect of your story. So we're going to come back to the origin, but you brought up, which is your dad's studio, which is now something you're running as well. So for those who don't know, give me some location and timing. Where is the studio located? What was it like? What was the music scene? What was happening then?
Yeah, and this goes for all of Original Collective Soul. We grew up in a town called Stockbridge, Georgia. We all went to the same high school. The Rowland brothers' father was the minister at the Baptist church, and my father had a basement studio in the tiny little town. But we were only 20 miles south of Atlanta, so it was a really, when you look back, it was a really great place to grow up because it was very local. It was very small town, but we were 20 miles from Atlanta. It's not a small town anymore. Atlanta has continued to be one of these fastest growing metro kind of cities.
Yeah.
But we had everything, we had almost all the options in the world 20 miles away from us, but we were in a small town where everybody knew everybody. And my dad, in an era where there wasn't YouTube or any internet, he got the book and learned how to build a studio. I tell everybody our dining room table was always either a drafting table or it was truly truly an artist that wasn't going to be held back by anything. He was a do-it-yourselfer, and he had a lot of friends that would help him. There's always musicians that want to help out and get some, maybe get some studio time later down the road. And that barter system was alive and well when they opened that studio. That studio was opened in '76. I'd have been 5 years old. But yeah, that's the area we came from. It's more of an industrial metro area now, but it was small town in the '80s.
So what type of bands were recording there? Like, what do you remember about going to Dad's work?
Yeah, I remember anything. I mean, bluegrass, R&B. It was Atlanta, so there was a lot of stuff. And my father was real good friends with a lot of the bigger studio owners. Mike Clark at Southern Tracks, Rodney Mills at Studio One, and Reel to Reel Studios would have been like right underneath those studios. It was a pro studio, had a Trident board. In 1984, I believe the Trident was delivered from Oxford, England, all the way to tiny little town, Stockbridge, Georgia. But it was right underneath some of those bigger ones. So it was a lot of bands that some bands had budgets and record label support, but for the most part, it was a lot of independent artists. And if it was somebody big that came by, I remember 38 Special came by. They just had to. Rodney Mills, again, one of my father's friends, sent 38 Special down there just to. I think they had to just track one extra thing, and they needed to do some kind of editing on some tape. They had to cut some tape or something. And Rodney was busy, so he sent him down to my dad's studio. So if it was somebody bigger, Driving and Crying, I don't know if you know that name.
Sure, yeah, of course, yeah.
They're pretty regional, but most rockers know about them. And super good friends now, and it really should be considered amongst the best. But they would have came down there and they just patched something up on the that was the Fly Me Courageous record.
Right on.
But not a lot of names you would recognize. But as far as the genres, there was everything down there. I saw R&B bands. I saw bluegrass. I saw bluegrass bands that were setting up around one mic and playing stuff, and everything was always eye-opening to me. Christian rock, everything was happening down there. A lot of good stories, and I learned a lot just by keeping my ears open, and my eyes open, and sometimes just watching the flow of how a studio works. That's you don't just know that as a band, and now that I work with bands, I have to I see it a lot. But
so is your dad still with us? Is he alive or?
No, he passed away. That was December 2018.
And so what happened? Did the studio close and you reopened the studio with the same name? Is it the same studio? Because this is the studio now for you.
It is. Reel to Reel Studios is. It was 76 when my dad opened that. It's the oldest now on the books, oldest studio in Georgia. The location I'm at, because Capricorn Records closed down, and when they had to reopen under a business name. But they're back open. But Southern Tracks is closed. All the classic ones, Cheshire Sound, no more. But yeah, this location I'm at was built in 2001. I tell everybody that would have been my father's lifetime build. He consulted on other studios too, but that one was a lifetime build and a gorgeous studio. And I probably would have been at the studio today if not for all these travel issues and weather related travel issues yesterday and this morning. But it was built in 2001, and my father passed away. That was December, And I went in there in January into the studio. And my dad, I'll go back a little bit. My dad had a partner, Steve Rawls, in the late 90s. They joined together. Uh, Steve had a small studio upstairs from the original location. And they partnered together, and the partnership bought in the idea to rebuild a brand new place and come together and have one studio, real studios. So yeah, it's also on the south side of Atlanta, probably 10 miles from the airport. And yeah, like I said, whenever you have an opportunity to build a studio from the ground up, it was literally an empty shell uh, in a commercial space, but an empty shell, a little over 20-foot ceilings. Whenever you have that opportunity and you know what you're doing, you can come away with a really nice studio. And I walked in there after my father's death, and Steve was there with me, and I just knew it in my soul that I wasn't going to let that studio go. Uh, and Steve had me as his partner for a couple years, and then I wanted to really do some serious upgrades, and I think Steve had been in debt with the studio a little bit before, and Steve wasn't ready to like dive in as much as I was, so I got a new SSL board, and we really upgraded everything, and I'm the full owner now.
So what's that like? Because there's so many people who would think you're doing this in a world where people don't necessarily even want or need a studio. They're recording so differently now. What's it like? Is it nostalgic? Is it the fact that we still need studios like this? How is it for you?
Yeah, I mean, depending on what kind of music you're doing, at some point, anything you really hear is going to go through a studio at some point, even if it's just the mixing process. But uh, you still need, if you got a drummer, if you're a band, there's only so many ways that you can feel like a band and perform like a band and get recorded the highest fidelity. You got to have ISO rooms. You got to have the right stuff. You got to have the right mics. The drum room sounds amazing. Um, and also you got to think about, we know that room. We know which mics to do. We know which, I've got like 15, 20 snare drums. We know which snare drums to use for whatever act is coming through. So people know there's expertise there. And some people that are bands and are experienced bands, they'll want to come in and use the room to record the main tracks and get that vibe. Hey, we're playing together. I'm looking at you in the eyes. You're my drummer. I'm playing bass with you. It's better. It's just going to be better. It's going to have a little energy, a little more tactfulness to the music that's there. You can feel it. Uh, but that being said, reel to reel isn't necessarily, unless you know me, it's not really necessarily. I'm not really trying to. I tell everybody I'm not really trying to hawk hours. It's a production. I tell everybody it's a production house. So me and my partner Brian Collins is a friend of mine, a singer songwriter also, who owned a studio. We realized how close we lived together or near each other during COVID when nobody was touring anymore, and became great friends. And I always feel like, and you can even go back. The great studios were producer driven or mix driven. Yeah, Southern Tracks in Atlanta is the greatest example. Uh, Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, uh, Stone Temple Pilots. They didn't come to Atlanta because they wanted to record in Atlanta. They came to Atlanta to work with Brendan O'Brien. Um, so about 75% of our stuff is things that are on our production company, and people are coming there to work with us. Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, band out of California. So that's, to me, the only way to really make a proper studio be worth your time. I think there's ways to keep studios open, but I think if you're just a studio owner trying to get people in there, it's a lot of work, a lot of upkeep, and probably not a lot of profit.
Yeah. Atlanta in and of itself has such a rich history of music.
Yeah.
What I find so interesting is now when I think about Atlanta, I also think about people like Rick Beato.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And we've known him, he's huge now, but we've known him our entire lives because he's been in Atlanta his entire time.
It's amazing to see how places can shift like that, and how music comes and goes, and how, if I think about Atlanta and rhythm and blues, and then what happened in the 90s, and just the vibe of rock as you attach it to Atlanta is so diverse too, in terms of the band's music we've had over the decades. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you include the Macon area and Capricorn Studios, then you really got a broad, diverse situation where you start listing it out, and it's like, there's famous areas for music, and I think Georgia kind of can get overlooked a little bit. But I mean, you can go back to an era where you'd had Otis Redding and Little Richard playing on the same little street in Macon, Georgia.
Right.
James Brown, Ray Charles. That's when you go back further, and then you got the Allman Brothers, Atlanta Rhythm Section. You got all kind of, and of course, we're basically, there was certain eras where we're basically the hip hop capital of the world, between Outkast, Ludacris, and T-Pain now still kicking butt, man. It's huge here.
It's amazing. The diversity is really amazing of Georgia.
Yeah. And then on rock and roll, we got, Collective Soul. That doesn't necessarily sound like a Southern band, but, we're definitely an Atlanta band. Our buddies, Black Crows. And then you got like Mastodon. They're worldwide, and they're straight out of Atlanta. So Atlanta used to have more of a scene where there was more live music, but I think a lot of towns used to have more of a live music scene, and that's not the same anymore. But there is a lot of people, a lot of pros that are either from Atlanta or coming back to Atlanta and living and doing some of their work.
So you have this incredible journey as a young person in terms of exposure to a lot that's going on. We're actually almost the exact same age, you and I. And I also reflect on just how lucky I actually feel. People say, oh, the 60s and 70s had the best music. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think about getting the real tail end of the 70s as I was getting into music, 8, 9 years old. And then when I reflect on the 80s, maybe the sound wasn't, but the music and songs now in retrospect, incredible. And then the 90s. And so I actually feel like people like you and I might have grown up in the most interesting era of music, which I think generates really interesting musicians and types of music. And I think that Collective Soul, for me at least, falls into that. So there's this one point in your young life where you're exposed to the bass and you have the ability to play every instrument because they're there and you're already playing them, but you decide to stick with the bass. So what was that moment? Was it just because there was already a guitarist? Are we one of those people? Or
Yeah, I mean, the original Collective Soul, we were all really great friends, and it's kind of one of those stories where, it was like, what spot? Who's going to get that spot? We were really great friends. Here's the short version. Ed would have been head engineer at my father's studio from when he came back from Berkeley. He spent 1 year at Berkeley and then decided he didn't need a degree to be a songwriter. And first thing he did was go to my pops and ask him if he can learn how to engineer. And my dad taught him, and my dad nurtured him, and they even co-wrote some songs together when Ed was young. And Ed had carte blanche on the studio when there was free time. And again, Ed's parents would have been 2 blocks away, and he was living with them some of the time. And I remember Ed had an apartment in Atlanta when he got a little older, in his mid-20s. But me, Shane, Ross, and Dean, Ed's little brother, we grew up, gravitated towards the same types of music in the 80s that as far as us, we were more into what was called alternative, which is really just alternative to hair and makeup, and really. But we all watched Ed's songwriting progress, and we were all fans of Ed's songwriting. So when Shane got out of high school, he was immediately in bands with Ed, playing drum set. And then the evolution kind of happened over a period of about 4 years. Me, because of how I grew up, and kind of, my mom used to kind of shake me every now and then and be like, don't try to be in a rock band, like, cause it's really my dad's, you got to think about my dad's thing. The studio was a ways to the means. He tried his whole life to be and sign bands and sell his songs. In later years he was pitching songs in Nashville, and he charted on Billboard barely, and had some success. But my mom, it's a tough way to raise a family on a recording studio and live music and performing. But I was a music major at Florida State for a couple of years, and then Georgia State. And I was the one that would play. I would play with the guys, and I was super, like, I knew there was something there, but I couldn't commit because I just had so much going on at school, recitals, and I was a percussion major. Switched to orchestration, but yeah, when I committed, it was just that spot where the guy playing bass was just not quite as tight as we were, and I told him I'd play bass, and I had never played bass at that point.
Well, in fairness, you kind of had, right?
There is obviously a universal situation with music, and like I said, piano and music theory were something I was soaking up. By the time I was 11 and 12, I was understanding it and soaking it up, and then even when I play bass today, it's I'm looking in my brain. I'm looking at a keyboard.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think about this too, because people always say, like, why do they start kids on piano, not guitar? And I'm like, because it's right in front of you. It's black and white. The keys are there. Like, people don't get what it's like to have to grip an instrument, this side or that side, left hand, having the strength, getting over the neck. Like, it's the actual hurdle is a lot more than just hitting keys.
Yeah. And that's a two-sided story. Like you said, it's kind of tough to do the guitar thing. You don't really have a visual thing. And then on the opposite side of the fence, you got a piano. You've got 12 notes in an octave, and it's visually laid out for you. And you start to understand, oh, major chord, minor chord. Oh, that's how that works. That being said, most kids get bored with piano, so it's like you pretty much got to give them whatever they'll continue to play if you want them to do something. But
my musical journey, Will, was a nightmare. I started off, I was probably 7 or 8 on the mandolin. Do you know how hard it is to play?
That's laughable. I got one behind me. I'm still not good at it.
It took me a while to full circle on that before I got to the bass and thought, I can go back to string instruments and not hit every moment of it, because there's something, again, that neck and the plucking and the finger positioning. It's so different to get a tone versus a piano, right? It's so much more immediate on the piano when you're young.
Mm-hmm. And I do think, like you said, visually, I think that matters. I think that matters a lot.
Yeah, it maps your brain. I think it totally maps your brain. And I think that not having it made it harder for me when I got older to learn music theory. It was it
has to. I mean, almost everybody I know that didn't start on piano just doesn't have that music theory thing as slick as I do. I kind of,
So Collective Soul is happening when you say I'm going to be the bass player here, or it's just starting? Is there a name? Is there
the name happening? Collective Soul was just being kicked around. When I told him I'd play bass, and I think we had definitely played some shows under Collective Soul where I was the sixth guy. I was playing percussion and singing backgrounds with Ed. That was the other key to me being in the band, is I could sing and follow Ed.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story in and of itself. So how old are you at this point, and what year is this? Where are we at now?
That would have been 93 when I committed, and I would have been 22 years old.
So within a year and a half, the band has a record deal.
Yeah, less than a year probably.
Okay, so that's a crazy story. I mean, we know bands that were our age that were trying in years and struggling and getting. I mean, that's pretty quick to get a deal like you guys got.
Yeah, but like I said, Ed's 7.5 years older than me. You got to realize, what sounds like overnight success is like 10 years of overnight success, Yeah. And we did have the relationship. Think about us even playing in bands in high school together, me and Shane and Ross. We're learning how to play and be a band, So was the name Collective Soul only a year old when we got signed? Yeah. were we a young band, new band? Not really, not at all.
So what is happening in the music scene? Because I want people to understand they didn't live through it. It's kind of unique. And then at the
And listen,
same
I'm gonna
time,
hit this.
so,
Keep going.
oh, I was going to say, so what's happening in the music scene? And then how is the band getting to the point where there's this excitement? How many of the songs do we already have? Where's the band at?
That's a good question because the first record, the first Collective Soul record, was we've told people it was a little bit of a singer-songwriter demo.
Right.
You can tell which songs were recorded as a band with real drums and stuff. Love Lifted Me, Good Night, Good Guy, Sister Don't Cry. You know, if I saw the list, I could tell you which ones were kind of recorded as a band. But Ed was also, he was 29 years old at this point, and he's like, okay, well, maybe I can sell some of my songs. And so some of those songs on the first record were almost 100% Ed, or Ed and one other person, or Ed and two other people. And Shine's one of those examples. The one that broke us is a drum machine. It's an octopad with some drum machine sounds. And Ross played the solo, and Ed's playing everything else.
It's amazing. So how do you start thinking about being the bass player in this band that now has, I mean, like you said, that song just changed the world. It was a big song everywhere. And on top of that, you're waiting, record deals happening. There's an excitement. How are you thinking about what's happening in this moment? How do I become the bass player of this band? How do we own this?
Man, we had that studio acumen because, believe me, we were all friends in high school. So everybody was hanging out in the studio, not just me and Ed.
Right.
We had that studio acumen. We were really close friends. And we didn't think we had made anything. Like I said earlier, we didn't think we had made it. We knew we had a lot of work to do. And that's really the truth. When you get signed, that's when your workday begins. That's not the end of it. But
Sure.
There was not cocky at all, but there was a confidence about who we were and what we thought we could be. We wanted to prove it, and we were always looking, let's record the next record. Let's record the next record. We wanted to prove it, but when you're that busy and you're just thinking about how do we get better? How do we create timeless music? I don't know. I don't really remember what we felt like other than let's go conquer the world together, guys. We're meant for this. We're kind of meant for this. I think there was a little bit of that in our feelings that we were meant for this. People are going to like this.
So do you have to have some type of mental shift to say, well, I'm the bass player now in Collective Soul? You can still feel like a multi-instrumentalist and studio guy, but there's a look, there's an aesthetic, there's a sound that people are now looking to. Does that change how you see the instrument and what you're trying to do with it, or not really? You just sing it like, I got this. I know how to play this bass.
No, I mean, I definitely felt like there was even just the physical learning curve of having to deal with those big strings and how to address the instrument. Man, that's it's a lifelong journey as far as learning what to do. I'm learning new things every day. But I can say now that, articulation, dynamics, those are things that I've got a good grasp on. I didn't really have a great grasp on it in the beginning, but rhythmically, you're talking about, again, me and Shane in the rhythm section. We played right next to each other in the snare drum line in high school for 4 years. I mean, we knew each other's feel and vibe without being on the exact type instruments that we were on. And downbeats, arrangements, music theory, that was all already there as far as understanding how to lock that in. And I listened to old bootlegs, and I'm like, oh, we were pretty good in '94, but there's a lot of evolution there, and still today trying to learn and be better.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, Will, because when I think of this band, even back in the early 90s, to me, it was always a band that was very anthemic, extremely melodic, very tightly arranged from my perspective. And I think about the bass, and I'm trying to, as we were getting ready for the conversation, I'm like, go back, Mitch. Like, you were writing in the music industry, you were interested in all these bands, you were meeting them. And I always felt that there was something that you were doing, like you were carving out a space, and the space was somewhat foundational within what you just mentioned between yourself and the drummer. But there was also something expressive really happening that was coming from the bass. And I always found that duality super interesting in how you play and how the music evolves with the bass.
Yeah, thanks. And I think there's certain examples of certain songs where it's like, oh, wow, okay. I mean, you just, it's like, I don't know. You close your eyes and open up all the energy and just listen to your mates, listen to the song, always try to support the song. But yeah, it was never like, oh, let me play downbeats and roots. My bass mentors, some of my favorite musicians, even before I played bass, would have been bass players. Now that I think back, Adam Clayton, I follow a lot of kind of things that, if you listen to the Dosage record, you can hear some Adam Clayton on there. How Paul McCartney, he's my all time favorite musician. How his bass lines can run a whole song. It's those are some of my influences. Sting, again, bass player. That's one of my biggest influences in my life. But as far as coming up with the lines and not being just root, downbeat, da da da, I just close my eyes and open my heart and mind and see what we can find that supports the song.
We're hitting interesting space here, Will, and I'll tell you why. You mentioned before 80s and alternative, and I think that while I wasn't fully appreciative of the genre, probably more interested in the songs that were charting. I think otherwise I was more into the rock stuff at the time. But then you mentioned Adam from U2, you mentioned Sting, who would have been in the Police at that time, and even Paul McCartney at that time. I know you probably
great solo
the Beatles,
records,
but yeah. So now we're talking about a little at the end of the Wings, heading into solo records. And he's got this levity to him with his bass playing in the solo records that, while I could definitely point to some incredible stuff in the Beatles, I thought the stuff in solo was just, I was actually at one point asking a friend, are we sure Paul played on that stuff and that it wasn't some other bass player, because it was so interesting. It sounds like what you were interested in terms of the 80s, that alternative side, also had some of the most interesting bass lines that weren't overly complex, but just very melodic to the song.
Yeah, and I'd always, and NXS would have been another 80s band that I was really into.
Where were you
REM,
with Joe Jackson? Were you Joe Jackson?
Yeah, loved it.
Yeah, we talked about Graham a lot. He's been on the show. He's great.
REM, of course, we were super proud of REM. They were from Athens, Georgia, right next door to us, and they didn't sound like a Southern band, so we were kind of proud of that also. Like, check this band out, and not that we weren't into Southern rock, we were, but it was just all around us, and we were into different music. But yeah, I mean, I like when there's different parts. I think it's boring if you can combine melodies, and again, orchestration. I remember analyzing symphonies and stuff in college, and that's when I switched to being an orchestration major. So I was writing charts. I was writing charts. I was writing charts for marching bands. So I was always thinking of things as like a big staff of music and everything working together and nothing being too linear. Nothing has to just do that. They can all work together and be something that the sum is better than the individual parts.
It's hard to imagine that it's 3 decades, 30 years that we're seeing the evolution of this band. And I'm just wondering, when you think about continuity and just how you're playing the bass over that time, what does that mean to you? Do you think about, is this collective soul sounding, or are you trying to do it's the continuous conversation I have here every month, which is we're chasing tone. This is what we're all doing.
Yeah, man. And I just, when we start talking about tone, I'll tell you that I think tone starts in your head and your hands.
For sure.
And then we can talk about what bass we pull out. And then we can talk about some
I don't like
preamp
talking
and
about
compressor.
I don't like talking about gear, Will, because I agree with you. In fact,
It's
one of the,
secondary. It's so secondary,
yeah,
and you got to have the good stuff, but
I
it's
was,
so secondary. Tone. I can use the same gear and get so many different tones and sounds just by the way I address the instrument.
yeah, those might be the biggest lessons I've learned in the past 10 plus years doing this. One was just how Leland Sklar lives and dies by that idea.
Okay.
And then the other one was Billy Sheehan, where, again, over the years, he's really only played with a 4-string. And his whole approach was, I need to be able to feel it in my head and my hands. And then if I can't get to that sound, he feels like it's some type of limitation that isn't because of the gear or the extra string. It's like an interesting thought that he has around trying to rethink and use his hands in a way to get to that sound. I love that.
That's an evolution of a musician too. You have to. That takes a while to understand that. But it's the truth.
How much time do you spend on the bass, thinking about the bass? Has it changed? I mean, I want to get into the fact that you had this incredible solo album called The Lighthouse, because that, again, brings you back to being a multi-instrumentalist. But I'm still thinking that there's this anchor of this band, of this life you have, where it's got to be who you are.
Yeah, I do feel super comfortable being the guy who's kind of in control of setting the foundation, but tying together the melodies and the guitar work. I do feel very comfortable doing that. But again, I didn't know I didn't know that when I decided and I told the guys I'd play bass. It was just you kind of evolve that way, and your mindset will shift and change, and you'll understand a little bit more about what's going on.
Do you appreciate the instrument more? Do you hear it more? Do you think about it more as you get older, as you're thinking about new songs, new types of music?
Uh, I don't know if I don't know if I ever underappreciated it necessarily, but I've always been more of a overall vibe and rhythm and feel person as far as what I gravitate towards, and then melody as well.
Yeah.
And lyrics to me are important. The hook is important, but it's literally like third in line or fourth in line
Yeah.
to what I gravitate towards. And if the lyrics are terrible, it's not going to be good for my opinion of the song. But I gravitate towards a solid feel and a vibe that kind of starts with some rhythm section stuff, and then definitely a melody. I've always just been gravitate towards great melodies.
Do you think that anything changed in terms of your bass instincts when you were doing your solo stuff and fronting versus when you think about where you sit in Collective Soul?
I don't think so. I mean, I think maybe my mentality changed a little bit because when I'm doing the solo stuff, and yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I'm excited to work on another one. I've got some really
It's
good
time.
tunes lined up.
It's
Yeah.
time, Will.
Well, you got to check out. You got to check out. What's the name of that record? Serengeti Drivers. I released that in 2019.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I slipped one by on you.
Oh, yeah, I got to check that out.
But yeah, so most of those songs start behind either a piano, and a handful of them start with me on acoustic guitar. So on Serengeti Drivers, I had a buddy, Mark Wilson, who's a great bass player. He played half the bass tracks because I didn't. He's an amazing bass player too. Like I knew we were fine, and anything I could even say or suggest to him, he's going to pick up right away. But yeah, I didn't even focus on half the bass tracks on that Serengeti Drivers record. I played the keys and some acoustics.
I'm curious a little bit about Ed in the sense of when I was talking to Duncan of Our Lady Peace, and again, basically growing up with Rain's voice is a character.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that to belittle it. I mean that as something truly powerful, much in the same way I think Bowie's voice was a character.
Yep.
Ed is like that too. Ed doesn't have that I don't want to say a standard voice, but it is its own character, its own story. And when you're playing bass against a voice like that or trying to build lines, I think it is a bit different than clicking in with the drummer. Ed's voice has changed even a lot over the years. And I think there's even variance in terms of the hits. You can hear hits and almost hear a different voice from Ed in each of these songs. Does that play in when you're making music live versus recording, how you think about bass lines because of the character of it?
Yeah, but not in a technical way. Not in something where I add it up to where I'm going, oh, he's doing that there, so I need to do something else here. Just in the way where it's an overall feeling and serving the song and making sure the song and the melody is properly cradled, so to speak, I guess. But yeah, I watched Ed work on his vocal technique again. You should hear some of the solo records. People would love to hear them pre-Collective Soul. So he worked on those vocals, and he has a really strong style that is one of a kind. And I totally agree with you, like the Bowie and Rain as well. It's not a typical, that guy should be a singer, what I mean? But they're some of the greatest lead singers of all time,
Yeah. After all these years, is there stuff you're still working on as a bass player? Is there something that's your go-to? Is there something that you challenge yourself with? Or is it just more about when the songs are coming, you're playing to the songs? Or is there stuff you're kind of fiddling with here and there?
Oh, I'm definitely like, I'll stumble upon something that I'm like, oh, and sometimes I'll even write a note down after a show, because you play so many shows and you forget what you were thinking on stage. I'll do something on stage and I was like, oh, that was different. And that is one thing I love about Collective Soul. Johnny Rabb on drums now for 13 years with us. We don't do it exactly the same every night. It's just, now it's not freestyle jam band, but we toy around with different stuff, different turnarounds and different lines. And so sometimes I'll even write a note after a show and be like, oh, dude, the way you tried that or the way you did that, let's think about that more, So yeah, those things definitely happen. Yeah.
I love that. And just in terms of the industry, right? We've seen this industry change so dramatically. We obviously went from physical to digital. We went from MTV to streaming. Has that changed how you think about being a bass player? Has it changed how you feel about music?
No, but we saw a wild evolution. I mean, they still make cassettes of our first 3 records.
Right.
And then, the Napster thing, we were one of the first bands we're kind of credited as being the first band to say, all right, we're going to outsource this and have our own little label and do it independently. And we went gold on the Youth record doing that, because the label game was not the same thing at all. Matter of fact, it was very negative for a lot of bands who tried to stay in the label game through that era. It doesn't change the way I think about playing bass. No, I'm still a stereo, right and left. Let's close our eyes and listen to a song.
You come to me as very musical. So some bass players are thinking about the connection points between the drum and the rest of the band. Some are thinking about being more in front. It always feels to me when I hear the music that it's very musical for you. It almost doesn't matter the instrument from when I think about you.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think it just goes back to this straight up orchestration, and I'm playing my part, but I think of things I was writing, 14 row staffs for marching bands and stuff. And so I play bass in a rock band, totally different, but it transfers over in that regard sometimes.
What is happening now with the band? So you're doing another leg of the tour in the States. And I know it inverts a little bit where Our Lady Peace is going to open for you guys. What is a year for Collective Soul? Is it more new music? Is it mostly these weekend warriors? Is it mostly tours? How do you think about it?
We've got we got so many things we can do now, and we still create great music. I know you've heard Here to Eternity. It hadn't even been out a year, and that seems like oh my gosh! I mean, like, time is flying. It's like what all the older generation used to tell me when I was young. Yeah. Time flies, and now I'm 54, and it's like, whoa, wow, and so yeah, we got so many things on the horizon. Like I said, Here to Eternity, the double record, Hadn't been out 9 months. The Quintessential Collective Soul documentary in July will be out. So keep your ear open for that. You'll know about it. Live Nation's pushing it, and there a lot of people will be pushing it. You'll have a chance to see that. It turned out really cool. We filmed it mainly at Palm Springs when we were recording that Here to Eternity record. So we mixed in, like, we did the thing where you mix in, like, here we are today in Elvis's Palm Springs estate, which is where we recorded. That's a whole nother story. And it was left just like he had left it. So it was a bit of a time capsule in a great way. Yeah, so we do that thing where we, like, kind of rewind. We start like live and here today. Here we are. We're pro musicians. Still have a hard time saying that. We're pro musicians working on a record. And, but here's where it started, and it goes back to basically Ed's childhood in Stockbridge, Georgia. And
it's amazing. Last observation that I'd love your thoughts on, which is the band came to town. You were playing Monday night. The band rolled in Sunday. I know this because I was down hanging out with the guys in Our Lady Peace at the hotel and saw some of you guys mulling around. And I know at night both bands got together to hang out, met your tour manager. And then the next day spent a lot of the day actually just backstage. And I was actually driving rain to the venue right ahead of your truck as you guys went from the hotel into the thing. And so, just observing casually while I'm back there, you're very close. I felt it when I saw you guys in the hotel that you're more than friends and bandmates. It felt very familial, everything, and very happy for each other. And I didn't feel a lot of energy that I typically will feel with bands 30 years on, meaning some guy came in, some guy's not here. We're kind of separate. We play this. It's good. It felt like you actually enjoyed each other's company. I mean, I would walk by the dressing room and even hear a lot of people coming by, and I was very moved by that. It was very nice to see, which is just me saying to you as somebody on the outside that it felt very, very close. But I'm also wondering, as I say that to you, how do you think about that? I mean, that's a long time to feel that way with the same people.
It's getting crazier and crazier the older I get when I think about it. I tell people I literally do not have a memory without knowing who Ed and Dean were, because I went to their church.
Yeah.
So you knew who the preacher's kids were, and we lived 2 streets over. Lynette, Dean and Ed's mom, told me a story about a year and a half ago about the first time she met my mom. Dean wasn't even born yet. So, I mean, even the 2 families go back pretty far. And Ed will say this on stage every now and then. We actually, you just said it. He said we actually do enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
And yeah, we still laugh at some of this. We might be, some people might not think it's funny, but we laugh at some of the same exact stuff we did growing up and in the 90s when we were a band. And we listened to a lot of the same music that inspires us, and we do that backstage together. And even the band, even knowing the guys in Lady Peace as long as we have, there's a friendship there that's really really awesome to have, and a respect factor that's really awesome to have. And it's such a great tour. Good to see Lady Peace headlining the arenas again.
Yeah, which is long overdue and well deserved for sure. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time. I'd love for you to just take an opportunity to let people know latest album, some tours, where they can check out more information, follow you on the socials, whatever you want.
Yeah, Collective Soul, you're going to find us on all the socials. I like to tell people to follow Reel to Reel Studios. We post who's coming through all the time. It's REAL, the number 2, REEL, and that'll pop right up. And yeah, please check out some of my solo work. It's all on the streaming services. That's fun to do. Keep your ear out for the documentary. That's going to be a fun one. It turned out really good.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Mitch.